They say hospitals are full of people, nurses rushing, visitors whispering, families waiting. But the night my mother took her last breath, every chair around her bed stayed empty, except mine. And the next morning, while my fingers were still trembling from holding her hand, my husband looked at me and said calmly, "So, about that 15,000. My name is Sarah, and for most of my life I believed endurance was the same as love. When my mother fell critically ill, I waited for family to show up, but silence filled every doorway. The weight of that night stayed with me, colder than the hospital floors. My husband Daniel should have been my comfort, but instead he became another door that closed. I didn't know it then, but everything that followed, the money, the secret files, the truth, would make me see my mother's life and my marriage in a different light. The hospital room was dim enough that the shadows felt alive. Machines blinked like tired eyes, breathing for the woman who had once carried me on her back through monsoon rains. I sat beside her, my hands wrapped around hers, waiting for a sound in the hallway, footsteps, a familiar voice, even the wrong door opening, something, anything. But the night stayed still. The world outside kept moving, cars passing, lives unfolding. But inside that room, time folded in on itself. It was just me, her, and the slow, uneven hum of a heart that wouldn't make it till dawn. I kept glancing at the door like an abandoned child waiting to be claimed. Every minute felt like an hour. Every breath she took sounded thinner, as if the air in the room was running out. People promise many things in life. I'll be there. Call me if anything happens. Family comes first. But when the moment came, no one showed up. I watched my mother's eyelids flutter, the way they used to when she fought sleep after long shifts. She was trying to speak. I leaned close enough to feel her breath on my cheek, warm but fading. "Mom, I'm here," I whispered. Her lips moved again, but the sound never formed. It was like watching a candle burn its last millimeter of wick. I pressed the call button for the nurse, not because anything changed, but because I needed someone else in the room, someone who knew how to name the things I couldn't face. When the nurse finally stepped inside, she didn't rush. She didn't pretend. She just looked at my mother, then at the monitors, then back at me. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." That was all. 2 words, and the room exhaled for the last time. My mother's hand went still. Not cold, not yet, just still in a way that felt final. The silence grew heavy, like grief had its own shape. I stayed in that chair long after the nurse left, staring, listening, not ready to stand, not ready to let the world swallow this moment whole. I tried calling a few people out of habit, voices from old memories, relatives who used to claim they loved her, but every call rang out or went straight to voicemail. Everyone was busy. Everyone had a reason. Maybe that's how it is when the light goes out in a small life. The world barely notices the flicker. When I finally walked out through the automatic doors, the cold hit me hard. The sky was still dark, the kind of dark that doesn't offer comfort. Streetlights washed the parking lot in pale gold. Daniel's car was parked right by the exit. He didn't step out, didn't lower the window, didn't even look up from his phone until I opened the door. "You took too long," he muttered, sighing like he'd been inconvenienced. I stared at him, the seatbelt hanging loose in my hand. Words were stuck in my throat. He didn't ask how she was, didn't ask what happened, didn't even look at my face closely enough to see the truth. "She's gone," I whispered. He blinked once, not slow, not thoughtful, just once. "Oh." Then he put the car in drive. That was it. That was all. The streetlights blurred as we pulled out of the parking lot. I couldn't tell if it was my eyes or the night. We drove in silence for a few minutes. The hum of the engine felt too loud, like it had no right to exist in the same world where my mother no longer breathed. I folded my hands in my lap, the ghost of her warmth still resting in my palms. Daniel cleared his throat. "So, about the money." I turned to him slowly. "What money?" "The 15,000, he said, shifting his grip on the wheel. "You know, the thing we talked about. I told you we needed it this week." I stared at him, numb. "My mother just died." "I know," he said quickly, "but that doesn't change anything. I still need it. Need. As if grief could be postponed the way bills sometimes could." "Daniel, why now?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He refused to look at me. "Because it's important. I explained this." No, he never explained anything. He talked around it, pressed, insisted, avoided the details. He exhaled, frustrated. "Look, your mom had things, right? Savings, accounts, jewelry, something. We can figure it out. I felt sick. Ice cold sick. He said we like he was part of her life. Like he mourned with me. Like he had a right to her name. The houses blurred past the window. Daniel kept talking about deadlines, amounts, timing, but I heard none of it. Only the echo of the nurse's voice. Only the sound of my mother's breath fading. And a new sound, quiet but impossible to ignore. Suspicion. When we reached home, the porch light flickered. A weak glow, barely enough to see the doormat. I stood there for a moment before going inside, letting the night settle on my shoulders. Daniel walked ahead, still talking about numbers, still pacing, still urgent. I stayed by the door, my hand resting on the frame, trying to catch my breath. My mother died tonight, and all Daniel wanted was money. 15,000. A number circling him like a shadow. As I walked down the hallway toward our room, one thought followed me like a whisper in the dark. What is he so desperate for, that he can't even let me grieve? The question settled deep in my bones. And I knew, whatever the answer was, this was only the beginning. Grief changes the way a house sounds. The floor creaks slower. The walls breathe heavier. Even the light seems unsure of where to fall. When I stepped inside that night, the air felt thick, like it had been holding its breath until I returned. I took off my shoes quietly, out of habit, as if my mother were asleep in the next room. Even though she would never sleep anywhere again. Daniel closed the door behind me with a careless thud. "You should try to rest," he said, but his voice wasn't gentle. It was tight, rushed, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere money-shaped. I moved through the hallway, like a ghost drifting through. A house it no longer belonged to. My hands trailed along the wall, tracing dents and scratches, the marks of a life lived. A home held together by my mother's quiet strength. Daniel followed close behind me, too close, his footsteps louder than mine. He kept asking questions, one after another, each one sharper than the last. Did the hospital say anything about her belongings? Did she keep a safe? Are you sure she didn't mention a will? I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to think about papers or signatures. All I wanted was one more minute with her. One more breath, one more word, something. In the kitchen, the clock ticked louder than usual, filling the silence between us. Daniel leaned against the counter, watching me. Not watching my grief, watching me. "You know," he said slowly, "your mom was organized. People like her don't leave without arrangements." His tone was soft, but not with sympathy. Soft like a salesperson. Soft like he was rounding the edges of the truth he didn't want to say out loud. I sat at the table and stared at my hands. He didn't mention her death, not once. Not a single "I'm sorry." Just questions. Just hints. Just pressure he tried to disguise as concern. Grief didn't make him patient. It made him hungry. Later, when he went upstairs, I stayed in the living room. The house felt unfamiliar without my mother's voice tucked into its corners. I pulled her old sweater around my shoulders, the one she wore while gardening, still faintly smelling of lavender and winter air. After a long while, I forced myself to go to her room. The door was slightly open, not the way I left it. A cold prickling worked its way up my spine. I pushed the door open quietly, half expecting to find Daniel inside. But the room was empty. Just the soft rustle of curtains and the hum of the street lamp outside. Then I noticed it. Her drawer, the one she always kept shut. It was open by an inch. Not wide, not messy, but disturbed. Like someone had opened it carefully, slowly, and just as quietly put it back. I stepped closer. My breath hitched when I saw the edges of her papers inside. Tax forms. Old letters, envelopes with bank stamps. She never cared about money, but she kept everything in order. "Did you come in here?" I asked softly, even though Daniel wasn't in the room. From the hallway, his voice floated back. "What?" "You were in my mom's room," I repeated louder. He appeared in the doorway, eyebrows raised. "No, why would I?" He didn't look confused. He looked annoyed I'd asked, and his eyes, just for a second, shifted toward the drawer. Just 1 second, but enough. I didn't question him again, not then. The air felt too unpredictable, like a storm building in a place where storms shouldn't exist. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Daniel shifted beside me, restless, sighing into the dark. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's drawer. The tiny gap, the disturbance, the quiet intrusion into a space that was supposed to stay untouched. Around midnight, when Daniel's breathing softened into a near snore, I slipped out of bed. I walked down the hallway, the wood chilled under my feet. My mother's voice came back to me, not in memory but in warning. Some people only show their truth when they think you're weak. She said that to me once, years ago, after a neighbor stole something small but important. My mother always noticed things. She saw through people in a way I never learned how to do. But tonight, I felt her watching through the silence. I reached her drawer again. My hands trembled as I opened it fully. Papers shifted inside, the scent of old paper and lavender rising faintly. Her handwriting peeked out from the edges. Stamps I didn't recognize, dates from years before. Nothing looked disturbed beyond a glance. Whoever opened it had been careful, intentional. Behind me, a floorboard creaked. I turned sharply, but no one was there. Still, the feeling didn't leave. That sense of being observed. Daniel never stayed asleep long. He moved lightly. He checked on things. On me. On my mother's things. I closed the drawer gently and held my breath in the dark. There was something Daniel wanted, and now I was certain it had nothing to do with grief. I returned to bed before he noticed I'd been gone. Daniel shifted when I slipped under the blanket, murmuring something I couldn't understand. His hand brushed my arm, cold. Not from temperature, from something deeper, hollow. He whispered, half asleep, "We'll figure out the money tomorrow." A promise, a warning. I couldn't tell which. I turned my back to him and stared into the dark of our room, the dark that suddenly felt smaller, tighter, like it was closing in around me. My mother had tried to warn me. People reveal themselves when they think you have nothing left to fight with. And tonight, Daniel had seen me at my weakest. I exhaled slowly, steadying my heart. Whatever urgency he carried, whatever truth he was hiding, it was coming for me next. Morning light came in thin, tired stripes, falling across the living room like it didn't want to wake anything. I sat on the floor surrounded by my mother's belongings, the smell of old fabric and dust rising like faint memories. Her things were quiet, the kind of quiet that holds its breath. I kept telling myself I was ready to go through them, but my hands shook every time I touched something she'd touched last. A coat slipped from my lap, her winter one, and when I picked it up, something stiff shifted in the pocket. A sealed envelope, my name across the front, written like her hands weren't listening to her anymore. That's when the room seemed to tilt, like whatever she had hidden was meant to find me now. I held the envelope for a long time before opening it. The paper felt warm, almost like it remembered her skin. My mother wasn't a dramatic woman. She never left big speeches or hidden messages. When she had something to say, she looked you in the eyes and said it plainly. So why this? Why a secret? I slid my finger under the seal. Inside was a small brass key, cold and heavy in my palm. A folded slip of paper sat behind it. I opened it carefully, afraid it would fall apart. There were only 5 words written there, crooked, shaky, but unmistakably hers. Don't trust the ones who rush you. And beneath it, an address. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Daniel's voice floated faintly from the kitchen, asking if I wanted coffee. He sounded normal, too normal, like last night hadn't happened. Like he hadn't hovered behind me in doorways, watching what I touched, what I didn't. I slipped the envelope into my pocket before he came closer. He leaned on the door frame, eyes sliding toward the boxes on the floor. "Find anything important?" he asked casually. I shook my head. "Just memories." He nodded, but I felt his attention stretch toward me like a wire pulled too tight. I stood quickly and brushed past him, saying I needed some air. I didn't tell him I was leaving. I didn't tell him where I was going. Some warnings are too sharp to ignore. The address led me out of town, past the grocery store, past the old train tracks, to a row of faded storage units on the edge of an empty field. The sky was pale, holding the kind of cold that sits deep in your bones. Unit 27. That's what the note said. I walked slowly down the gravel path, each step crunched underfoot, loud in the stillness. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My mother had never mentioned renting a storage unit, not once in my entire life. She never owned much. She kept her world small, simple, contained. But this place, this door, this key, it felt like stepping into a life she lived behind my back. My fingers trembled as I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click, as if it had been waiting for me. The metal door groaned upward. Inside, dust swirled in the thin beam of morning light. Boxes lined the wall. A folding table held a few neatly arranged stacks of papers. A faint scent, old paper and cedar, filled the space. My mother had been here. She had stood right here. She had organized all of this. For me, I closed the door behind me, sealing myself in with whatever she'd left. My heart pulled tight in my chest as I moved toward the table. The first box held bank receipts. The second, a stack of rental agreements, all tidy, all labeled. The third box was unlabeled. Inside was a file, a thick one, with Daniel's name on the front. For a moment, the room felt too small, like the air had slipped out through the cracks and left me in a vacuum. I stared at the file, my mother's shaky handwriting circling. Daniel's name, like she had tried to emphasize it. The date on the corner made my stomach twist. 6 years ago, 4 years before I met him. My legs felt unsteady as I sank onto the metal chair by the table. My fingers hovered over the file. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to know why my mother had been watching him, tracking him, collecting information long before he stepped into my life, pretending it was fate. But I opened it anyway. Inside were documents, printouts, copies, notes scribbled in the margins. A large receipt from a company I didn't recognize. A background check. A handwritten note that simply said, "Don't let him near your accounts." A tremor ran through me. My mother had always been calm, gentle, steady. But her handwriting here was sharp, almost frantic. I flipped the page. Another note. This one folded. My hands shook as I opened it. "He looks for widows, women with sick parents, vulnerable ones. Don't fall for the charm." My breath caught. For a second, I forgot how to inhale. She wrote that 4 years before I met him, before he approached me at the pharmacy, before he offered to help carry my groceries, before he asked about my mother's health. My mother didn't just suspect him. She knew him, knew something about him I didn't, something he never wanted me to find. I set the papers down slowly, afraid they might shatter if I moved too fast. My pulse throbbed in my ears, loud enough to drown out the world outside. The storage unit felt colder now, the kind of cold that sinks into your spine. My mother, already sick, already fading, had used what strength she had left to gather this. To save it, to save me. I folded the documents carefully and slipped them back into the file. Then I locked the storage unit again, pressing the metal door down until it echoed through the empty field. When I stepped outside, the wind felt sharper. Different, because now I knew something I couldn't unknow. Daniel didn't come into my life by accident, and my mother hadn't been warning me about grief. She'd been warning me about him. I don't remember breathing when I stepped back into the storage unit. The dust hung in the air like a warning. Papers lay scattered across the small metal table, and the file with Daniel's name sat in front of me like a wound waiting to be touched. I whispered into the quiet space, "Mama, what were you trying to tell me?" The answer came when I opened the next document. A receipt. Another, and then a third, each one stamped, signed, and tied to a name I didn't recognize until I read the fine print. It wasn't a bank. It was a collector. The kind who doesn't send polite reminders, only threats. My mother had paid off Daniel's debt. Not once, not twice, but enough times that the totals blurred together. And the dates cut the deepest. They were from before I ever met him. I closed my eyes, letting the truth settle inside me like broken glass. He knew her before he knew me, or at least, he knew how useful she was. I turned another page and felt the blood drain from my face. A letter, a short one, handwritten, not to my mother, to Daniel. "If she interferes again, we'll handle it our way." My fingers began to shake. Handle it, our way. I pressed my hand to my forehead, fighting the heat rising under my skin. My mother, she wasn't just protecting me. She was protecting him too. Protecting a man who had smiled at me like I was his salvation. A man who told me I was safe with him. A man who now wanted $15,000 from me. Suddenly the room felt too small, the air too heavy. I packed the documents back into the file, clutching it like a lifeline, and left the storage unit. The metal door slammed shut behind me like the end of a chapter. I hadn't realized I'd been living inside. When I reached home, Daniel was in the living room, pacing like someone waiting for a verdict. He looked up, pretending to smile. "Hey, I've been calling you." I didn't answer. I stood in the doorway, clutching the folder, and watched him. Really watched him. The way he avoided my eyes. The way his knee bounced. The way he kept checking his phone like he was expecting bad news. Or like he owed someone something. Again. He finally noticed the folder in my arms. "What's that?" he asked. "Your past," I said. He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I walked in slowly, placing the file on the table between us, as gently as a confession, as violently as truth. "Sit," I whispered. He didn't. He crossed his arms and laughed, the way people laugh when they're cornered. I don't have time for drama today, Sarah. Then make time, I said. Because this is yours. He hesitated. Then he picked up the first paper. His face drained instantly. I watched his jaw tighten, watched him swallow hard. Watched the mask he wore every day slip inch by inch. You went through my mother's things, I said quietly. He said nothing. You let her pay your debt. You let her deal with those people. You let her get threatened because of you. Sarah, don't. My voice broke, more with betrayal than anger. Don't you dare pretend this isn't what it looks like. He shut the folder too quickly, like the pages might burn him. And then he finally looked at me, not with the softness he used to wear, not with the charm he loved to display, but with fear, real fear. Sarah, please. He ran a hand through his hair. You don't understand. Then explain. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, like the truth was too tangled to say out loud. Finally, he whispered, I owed them before we married. Your mom, she stepped in without asking. She thought she was saving you from getting dragged into my mess. My mother didn't step in, Daniel. She bled herself dry to protect us. She hid this from me while she was sick. She carried your fear with her. He flinched. The silence grew heavy. Then he looked down, whispering something he probably wished I hadn't heard. They're asking again. My heart dropped. Who? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at me with that same urgency he'd been carrying for days. I need the money, Sarah, before they come here. I stared at him, the man I thought I married, the man who held me while I cried for my mother, the man who whispered promises at night, promises that now felt like smoke. So that's why you wanted the $15,000, I said quietly. He nodded, shame staining his face. And you thought I'd just hand it over, I continued. Blindly, like she did. He grabbed my hand suddenly, desperately. Sarah, I'm trying to protect us. No. I pulled my hand back. You're trying to save yourself. You didn't tell me the truth. You didn't give me a choice. You used my grief to pressure me. His eyes darkened, defensive, angry, exposed. Because I knew you'd overreact. He snapped. You always do. I took a step back. His words felt like a slap, but not because of their sting, because of their familiarity. My mother once said, some people only show their truth when they think you're weak. And suddenly, finally, I understood what she meant. Daniel wasn't showing me panic. He was showing me himself. How long were you planning to lie to me? I asked. Until the debt collectors showed up at our door? He didn't answer. Silence again. This time, it wasn't heavy. It was revealing. I wrapped my arms around myself. I lost my mother, I whispered. And instead of holding me, you held out your hand and asked for money. His expression shifted, something between regret and calculation. And now, I added, you expect me to fix your past, to pay for your mistakes, to sacrifice more than she already did. He stepped closer. Sarah, please, if you don't help me, they'll... I stopped him with one sentence. If my mother couldn't save you, why do you think I can? He froze. Because he finally realized something. I wasn't weak anymore, and I wasn't his shield. Not anymore. I walked away from him, from the room, from the years I thought were real. Behind me, I heard him whisper my name. Soft, desperate, unfamiliar. Sarah. But I kept walking, because for the first time since losing my mother, I knew exactly what she had been trying to warn me about. And suddenly, I wasn't afraid of the truth. I was afraid of what would happen, now that I finally knew it. The storage unit was colder the second time I returned. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was me. I unlocked the metal door and stepped inside, letting the small fluorescent bulb flicker awake overhead. Dust still floated in the air, undisturbed, like my mother had left everything here, waiting only for me. Waiting for this moment. The folder with Daniel's name sat exactly where I had left it. Only this time I didn't hesitate. I gathered every document, receipts, letters, warnings, bank slips, old photos, everything she kept hidden to protect me. To protect us. My mother fought for a truth I hadn't been ready to see. But now I was. I slid everything into my bag and closed the unit door behind me. The lock clicked softly, like a whisper of permission. Go. By the time I reached home, evening had fallen. The house was dark except the living room, where a single lamp cast a yellow glow over Daniel. He wasn't pacing this time. He was waiting. His eyes snapped toward me the second I stepped inside. There was no greeting, no softness, no attempt at charm or calm. Only one sentence. Where's the money? I didn't answer. I walked past him, placed my bag gently on the dining table, and slowly took out the files, one by one, laying them out like stones forming a path. The color drained from his face. He recognized the handwriting. He recognized the letters. He recognized every lie he told me, printed in ink. His voice cracked into the silence. "You went back there?" he said. "Alone?" "Yes." "Why?" "Sarah, I told you I needed the money now." "You think this is a joke? You think I have time for—" I placed the final document on the table and lifted my eyes to his. "Daniel," I whispered. "I know everything." His jaw clenched. His breathing went uneven. He backed up a step, then another. Like truth was something physical, something choking him. What did you see?" he asked, barely audible. "Enough," I replied. "Enough to understand why my mother was afraid. Why she paid your debt. Why she hid all of this." He swallowed hard. "Sarah, look, I can explain." "You already have," I cut in. "With your silence." He shook his head, the panic rising. "You don't know what they'll do if I don't pay. I'm not paying your debt." It was the first time I said it out loud. The room seemed to stop breathing. Daniel stared at me like I'd betrayed him, even though I was only refusing to betray myself. His voice snapped back, sharp and loud. "Yes, you will." "You think you have a choice?" "They'll come here, Sarah. They'll come for both of us." "No," I said quietly. "They'll come for you." He froze, because he heard the shift in my voice. The us he relied on was gone. Daniel stepped closer. His face twisted with something ugly, fear mixed with entitlement. "I am your husband," he said slowly. "You're supposed to stand by me." "I did," I replied, "for years, until I realized you never stood by me." His breath hitched, rage or desperation, I couldn't tell. I opened the folder and placed one letter in front of him. The first threat my mother received. His eyes flicked over it and he swore under his breath, running a hand through his hair. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. "Why was she keeping these?" "Because you never paid her back. Because you kept lying. Because you dragged her into a world she didn't belong in. And now, you want to drag me into it too. That's not fair. It's the truth." He paced now like a trapped animal. "Sarah, listen, these people, they don't forget. I borrowed money from the wrong man, okay? Years ago, I thought I could fix it, but it got worse. Your mom helped. And now they want 15,000, I finished. "The same number you demanded from me. The same number she paid." He stopped pacing. "Not because he had an answer, but because he didn't. You used my grief," I whispered. "You waited until I couldn't think straight. Until I couldn't breathe without crying. You waited for the exact moment I was weakest, just so you could pressure me into fixing your past." His face hardened. "I didn't use you." "Yes," I said softly. "You did." Silence. For the first time, he dropped the act, the fear, the pleading, the panic, and what remained was a tired, bitter, cornered man. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Nothing." He blinked. "Nothing?" "Nothing," I repeated. "I'm not paying. I'm not lying. I'm not protecting you, and I'm not staying." He stepped forward sharply. "Sarah." I didn't flinch. I pushed the entire folder toward him. "Here," I said. "Face what you've been running from." His chest rose and fell too quickly. His eyes darted between the papers, my mother's handwriting. The warnings, the receipts, all the things he thought died with her, staring back at him. "You can't do this," he said quietly. "You can't just walk away now." I held his gaze. "I already have." That night I slept with my bag packed, not because I feared him, because I finally understood the difference between staying and being trapped. When morning light entered the room, I got dressed slowly, quietly. I slipped my mother's small key, her last gift, into my pocket. Downstairs, the house was silent. Daniel sat at the table, head in his hands. The files lay scattered in front of him, like ruins of a life he built on borrowed time. He didn't look up when I entered. He didn't speak. Maybe he knew words wouldn't matter anymore. I placed my house key on the table, not angrily, not theatrically, just gently. Because freedom isn't always loud. Sometimes it's soft. Sometimes it's a whisper. Sometimes it's the sound of a door closing behind you. As I turned to leave, he finally spoke, his voice raw. "Sarah, please don't walk out that door." I paused, but I didn't turn around. "I'm not walking towards something," I said quietly. "I'm walking away." And then I stepped outside. The morning air felt unfamiliar against my skin. Too open, too wide, too honest, but it was mine. I walked down the path without looking back, my mother's key safe in my pocket. For the first time since losing her, I wasn't drowning. I wasn't breaking. I wasn't trapped in someone else's chaos. I was stepping into a world she'd been trying to guide me toward all along. A world where truth didn't scare me. A world where freedom wasn't a dream. It was a direction, a choice, a beginning.